5, 4,
Oh,
3,
quietly.
2.
Hey, everyone, it's Pastor Mara here with the amazing Alyssa Robinson. And we're going to do a little interview here for you on Enneagram. So many of you, if you've been keeping up to date with our magazine, Alyssa wrote us a beautiful piece a couple issues ago on how Enneagram has affected her and what's been going on in her life in the last couple years, which has been a lot, Alyssa.
Yep, quite a few things.
Oh, yeah, a lot of things. And we decided that it would be fun. Well, I decided, and then I asked Alyssa, but she was totally on board, that we thought it'd be fun to just kind of do a little interview and have a little more personal touch on like Enneagram and why it's so good. And especially in this time of quarantine, might be a good time for you to buy a book or listen to a podcast or something if you're curious about it. So we both made some French press. We're cozy in our houses.
Cheers.
Cheers. And we're going to talk about Enneagram. So, Alyssa, first of all, you're a member at Oaklawn.
Yes.
When did you join Oaklawn?
I joined Oaklawn a year ago Easter. So I didn't join on Easter Sunday. I think I actually joined on Pride Sunday. Yeah. So it's been about a year. I don't know. It was on Pride.
It was on Pride? Cool. That's
Yeah.
a cool Sunday to join.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice. And you've been choir president. I know you were on comms team when that existed, and you're doing Enneagram, right? Those are about kind of like the three main areas that you've served at the community. And so you and Christine are teaching you taught an Enneagram class that started in January this last year, right?
Yep. It started in January. We wrapped it up in March, and it was really fun we did respect shelter in place and quarantine, and we ended up finishing up our Enneagram class through Zoom conferencing. So,
oh wow, how'd that go?
It was actually really great. It felt like people were, maybe it's just because we were all desperate for connection at that point, but people were more responsive, more active, more willing to ask questions in the Zoom call than in person class. Yeah.
Oh, that's wild. Well, so for the church, just an FYI, Alyssa and I went through Enneagram ourselves at the same time. So I was interning at SMU. I was interning from SMU at Oaklawn. And so I participated when Jeff Green and Christine Canistrasi offered the class, a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. So Alyssa and I were participants together, kind of going through this like self-discovery together, which was also really fun. But I just reflecting on that, like you bond with those classmates because you're diving into some deep stuff and you're kind of your number and all of its good and bad aspects are kind of laid out before everybody. So do you feel like their class bonded and taking the class together?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the things that's really interesting about Enneagram is a lot of people want to think about it as kind of like a BuzzFeed personality quiz. And that's not what it is at all. It is really deep self-discovery that you have to be ready for. And so the classmates that are on that journey with you are seeing you at the core of your being. Like it's like being completely naked in the class. Like you have nothing to hide because you've claimed your personality type, and then they are learning everything about you and who you are and how you function and what you're really good at, what you're really terrible at, your vulnerabilities. All of these things are laid out for everybody to hear in the class, and you often end up feeling really exposed, but it also bonds you together in a way that like we know each other on a deeper level than I know some of my own family members.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I'm going to put up when I edit this, I'll put up a little image of the Enneagram symbol, that circle with the numbers on it. Sure. But can you touch on a little bit, like you've told us your story of Enneagram and you've kind of just briefly described like why it's so great. What makes it different than like a BuzzFeed personality test? And like, how does that work with the numbers? And like for somebody that's never seen it and is kind of hearing the buzz of Enneagram, how is it different than what's out there? And like, what the heck is that number chart?
Well, I think that what a lot of people like to compare it to is Myers-Briggs or Strengths Finder or things like that. I try not to compare it to those because um, those are all very behavioral based. So it's asking, how do you act in certain situations? What Enneagram is asking is, why do you act that way
Oh,
in
okay.
these situations? And what I like to tell people is, Mara, you're a 1 on the Enneagram. I'm an 8 on the Enneagram.
Yep.
At being a 1 and an 8, we are both very concerned with right and wrong. And we're both very justice driven people. But the reason why and how we approach that is very different. And that's your personality. And so you and I could do the exact same thing and seem very similar, but we're worlds apart as far as the way that we process information and the way that we relate to other people. And so that's why I love Enneagram so much, is that it is a deep dive. It is a journey. It is a self-discovery. It's not something that you can just take a quiz and know everything about yourself. It's really hard work. And there are Enneagram quizzes out there or the tests that you can take but I discourage it. I don't recommend doing it because I think even then, when I as an 8 can be very rebellious. And so when someone told me not to take the Enneagram test, I was like, I'm taking the Enneagram test. And I did it. And it said I was a 5, which if you know anything about Enneagram and you know anything about me, you know I am not a 5.
Right.
But what's really interesting is that 8s and 5s are connected.
Yeah.
8s go to 5 in stress. And so if I was feeling stressed out when I took the test, or it was asking behavioral questions and I'm like, yeah, I've acted like that sometimes. I've acted like this sometimes, it's not true to your core motivation. And that's something that you have to dig into and discover for yourself. There's no magic quick fix to figure that out.
So since you're saying that, I'm going to pull up the number chart and see if I can share my screen I want you to give us a brief little overview of oh, this one's pretty. Let's do this one. It's funny. This one is probably an online quiz. Okay. So let's see. View image. Okay, I got it. Let me share my screen with you now. Desktop.
There we go. That beautiful Enneagram that people think is a pentagram.
I know. Okay, so walk us through this, because there's so much terminology, and I know we can't get into it too deep, but there's so much terminology, and I go to this number in stress, or I have a wing.
Yeah.
So can you just go over briefly the 2 numbers we're connected to, and then the idea of wings, and then I think this will give an overview of how comprehensive and how interconnected, how comprehensive this program is, but also how interconnected we are to each other.
Yeah. So first, let me start by saying one of the first things that Suzanne Stabile, who is the facilitator of the video course that we host at Oaklawn, one of the first things that she says about Enneagram is, I am not here to put you in a box. I am here to show you a box that you're already in so that you can step outside of it.
Yeah.
The goal of Enneagram is not for me to learn that I'm an 8 and to further live into my 8-ness. The goal of Enneagram is to encompass all of the positive traits from each number. We want to live holistically. And so when you talk about us being connected to each other, yes, I'm literally connected of my default setting is an 8, and those are the traits that I lean into more. But also in my toolbox, I have access to every number. And now that I know that, I can make an attempt to pull in the positive characteristics of other numbers. So that interconnectedness is very deep. But I'd like to do just an overview of what each of the numbers are, and then talk about how they're connected. Cool. So at the very top of the Enneagram is a 9, and uh, Jeff likes to say that they're the jewel of the crowned jewel of the Enneagram.
I can see that coming.
Which of course they are. 9s are the
Oh,
best.
Jeff,
I love them.
you're such a jewel.
Yeah. So 9s are known as the peacemakers. They are great mediators. Their core motivation is to avoid conflict. And so what 9s are really good at is bringing the rest of the numbers together. They can see all sides of a situation, but sometimes 9s are so busy connecting other people and helping other people feel heard and that their opinion is valued that they forget themselves and they forget their own needs and their own opinions, and they just merge with other people. And that's all part of the core motivation of avoiding conflict. A 1, which you would be able to speak to, they're often called the perfectionist. I don't like that term. I prefer to call 1s the reformers. And and the core motivation of a 1 is to be perfect, but not in a way that's pious. It's in a way that like they see the world and they see all of the ways that the world can be better. And that's such a beautiful thing. And they see that in systems, they see that in people, they see that in processes and activities. And so, yeah, they're very, very focused on fixing, reforming. How can I make this better? How can I make this the best that it can be? So you want to have 1s in your life to help you become better. I don't know. Mara, do you have anything to add about 1s?
Oh, yeah, I've got a ton to add about 1s. But I'm curious to see what you're going to say. Like you mentioned what the the weakness of the, not weakness, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe some growing edges for 9s in terms of they're caring for other people so much that they forget to connect and care for themselves. What would you say for 1s is like their growing edge?
For 1s, it's resentment. It is the thought that so 1s work so hard and they do so much for all of us, and because they want everything to be perfect and exact and right, they sometimes take over other people's jobs because they want it done right. And it's the mentality of, I want it done right, I'm going to do it myself. But as a result of that, they start to resent the people around them. They're taking on that extra work, but nobody asked them to take it on. And so it's kind of this vicious cycle of, I want it done right. I want to connect with people. I want to help you, but you're not doing it right. I'm taking it from you. Now I'm mad at you.
And yeah, would you say that a lot of that is fear of like criticism or failure on the back end?
Oh yeah. Yeah. 1s don't like to make mistakes, and they're really hard on themselves. Do you want to talk about the inner critic?
Oh yeah. I mean, and I don't want to hog too much time for the 1, but
oh girl, this is your show.
Oh, is it? Yay! Always wanted a show. Yeah, so the 1s have this thing called the inner critic, which is basically, first of all, it was a huge revelation to me to realize that not everybody has this, but it's just this voice constantly in your head saying, like I will pull up old emails that I sent like a week ago because that voice tells me that there was probably a typo in that email and it was an important email. And so I'll pull it up and I'll find a typo. And it's just like that constant, or I'll find, even if I don't find a typo, I find something wrong with it because it's a constant push towards making sure everything is perfect. And I use that word carefully because I agree with you, Alyssa, perfectionism. Like I hate that word, and I hate when people put that on me because it's not, that just seems to imply something that's not my intention, but I do want it to be as right as possible. So basically wherever that voice can come in and say, no, that's not right, or that font's different, or no, you got to make sure there's no typos, or, oh, I don't think, that joke wasn't very nice, or, I mean, well, that happens too, just in general, but there is like a constant peanut gallery in my head saying, like, playing over and over things and criticizing and breaking down, and it's not a very positive voice. So I've had to learn how to wield that energy positively.
Well, and it's because you care so deeply, and that's such a beautiful thing. And so like what I try to remember is, first of all, with ones, one of my bosses is a one, and he can be very critical, but he is nowhere near as critical of me that I know he is of himself. Like ones are so hard on themselves. And when he is being seeing mistakes and comes to me and says, why did we do it this way? And asking questions, rather than me getting frustrated by like, why are you always correcting me? I have to remember that because he cares, he deeply cares, and that's a positive thing. Maybe there are better ways that you could go about it. And that's something each of us in our number needs to work on, of like, now that I know I have a tendency to be critical of myself and critical of other people, how can I work on that and communicate better with other people to fit their needs? And I think that's a beautiful thing of Enneagram too, is learning how I can be better for others.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I also will say that, like, just not related to being a one, but in general with Enneagram, what I've learned is it is constant work. Like, you can't just learn once what your number is and then never pick it up again. Like, if you really want it to be a tool that enlivens you, it's constant work, which is hard. And you said that earlier, it can be hard, but yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things. Once you know it, you can't unknow it.
Yeah.
Once I figured out I was an 8, I was hit in the face with it every day, and I continue to be.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing. It's been a really positive thing. I'll keep going though.
Okay.
So 2s are known as the givers or the helpers, and their core motivation is to be loved, which all of us want to be loved. Don't get me wrong. All of us want to be loved. But for 2s, they find their value in whether or not you love me. And so their 2s are the most helpful, most giving number, most caring. They know your needs before you know your needs.
True.
So they'll show up with something that you didn't even know you needed, and they're amazing at that. They anticipate your every need. But the trap that 2s can fall into is it's not always altruistic giving. It is sometimes manipulative giving of, okay, if I do this for you, it'll make you love me. The reason I'm doing this for you is so that you will love me, so that you will affirm me. And 2s can also start to become very prideful in their giving and see themselves as better than others because they are better at recognizing other people's needs. Now, it's a beautiful thing that they can recognize other people's needs. And I'm not saying they always go to that place of, they're always doing something for you because they want something in return. That's not the case. Most of the time, 2s are the most loving, giving, like with no conditions attached, no strings attached. But every now and then, because they do want that love in return, especially if they don't feel like they're getting that love in return, then they'll start to do that manipulative behavior. A 3 on the Enneagram is known as the performer or the achiever. My mom's a 3, so I know 3s really well.
Yeah.
That
was one of the questions I want to ask you, because I know your family has all gone on the Enneagram journey. Like, has that have you had light bulb moments seeing your parents discover their numbers and your sister?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. And it's so weird because I'm so bad at guessing other people's Enneagram numbers. I just shouldn't do it. But I just feel like, and that's another thing to keep in mind. You cannot type other people.
Yeah.
You can't do it. No matter how well you think you know somebody, the only person who knows your core motivation is you.
Yeah.
And but it's illuminating because when we went through the class, and once I show how all this is connected, you might find this funny. My dad is a 9, my mom is a 3, my sister is a 6.
Oh my gosh. Boom, boom, boom. Yep.
Yeah, see that little triangle right there? That's my family. And then here I am out here. I'm an 8. I'm like, here you guys.
Because that's perfect. Because I feel like you're also very, not happy to be excluded, but that's just so you.
I'm fine with it.
I'm cool. Hey guys. Yeah.
But it is, once you learn somebody's number, especially someone that my sister, my parents, I've known my entire life, it reveals so much about like, oh my gosh, that's why you did that when we were teenagers. That's why you got so upset with me. That's why, all of these things, everything starts to get into line. And honestly, I think it's the closer you are to somebody, sometimes the harder it is
Yeah.
to type them, because like I would have never guessed my sister is a 6, and she's been my best friend my entire life.
Yeah.
I would have had no idea. I wouldn't have guessed it at all. But once she told me, she's like, yeah, I think I'm a phobic 6. I was just like, yeah. And then I had this memory of every single night as part of our nighttime routine growing up as kids, she would yell down the stairs, good night, I love you. Have you locked the door? That was part of our nightly routine. And I'm like, of course she's a 6. Because the 6's core motivation is to feel safe and secure.
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's insane. That's crazy. Okay. That's cool.
Yeah. But yeah, it is. It's really cool that my whole family's been through it, and it changes the way we interact with each other. And a lot of it is fun and lighthearted, of like my dad will say something and I'm like, stop being such a 9, but for the most part, it completely changes the way that we communicate with each other and the way that we love each other. Like, so my mom being a 3, she is the performer. 3's core motivation is to be perceived as successful. They're really good at blending. So 3's, man, we love 3's because they jump into an organization and they can be whatever you need them to be, and they're good at it. They're good at it. And so she can jump in with any group of people and she can fit in and she can make people feel welcome. And she's really good at those things. But what 3's really need, because they want to be perceived as successful, is words of affirmation. They need you to tell them they're doing a good job and I value you, and not for the work that you do, but I value you as a person. Because the trap that 3's fall into is they start to think, I'm successful, I'm really good at everything I do. The only reason that people love me is because of my output and not because of who I am. So, and there's so much more depth to that around like being thinking, feeling, or doing focused, and there's a whole lot. So I feel like I'm doing a disservice giving just a broad overview of each number.
No, this is actually great, because if people haven't heard of Enneagram before, this is like at least helpful to understand what the heck these numbers are and like why. Yeah. So keep going.
And I really want you, and like if you take the Enneagram class, she'll point out a lot of negative things about your number that make you kind of uncomfortable. And if it makes you uncomfortable, it's because it's true. But I really want to stay focused on positive things. Like, of course, there's the pitfalls of each number. Like for 3's, since they are so good at blending with people, they can become deceptive, and not in a way, like I wouldn't say 3's are liars. They are not. They are very great, upstanding people, but they start to deceive themselves, and they start to lose themselves and start defining themselves based on who they are in each group and what they bring to each group, as opposed to their core essence of who they are. And so it's more about like, it's not that 3's are lying to you and they're trying to deceive you. No, mostly they're lying to themselves and deceiving themselves about who they really are.
Yeah.
4's. So 4's on the Enneagram are known as the romantics. They're also known as the individualists. Yeah. So 4's are the rarest number on the Enneagram, and they're always very happy to hear that, because a 4's core motivation is to be special.
Yes.
To be unique. Yes. Yes. And so one of the defining characteristics of a 4 is that they experience so many emotions throughout the day. They will go from ecstatic and happy and deeply feeling joy to 10 minutes later in the depths of sorrow. Like it's just a constant emotional roller coaster for them, and they feel things so deeply. And so with fours, they're often characterized with a sense of melancholy. A lot of times, and it's not that they're a sad person or that they're a depressed person. It's just that sometimes when you're around a four, you get a more somber feel from them. But fours feel everything so deeply. So they're going to feel sorrow more intensely than you will. They're going to feel joy more intensely than you will. Everything they're going to feel more intensely.
So can I pause you a minute to jump in? Because I'm laughing because this sounds like me on some days. And that's
There
because
might be a reason for that.
right. So if y'all see how these lines are across and I wish you had done this with your 8 because you're connected to it too, but you can see that a 1 goes down to a 4 and it also goes across to a 7. And so, and I know there's more to this than like Suzanne's class kind of basically talks about your number can go one way in times of stress and in another way in times of security. And then in both of those, there's healthy ways to deal with your stress and low kind of unhealthy ways to deal with your stress. So you can go 2 ways, and you can be in a good place or a bad place in those 2 numbers. Yeah. So when I'm in a time of stress, I go to a 4. So all the things that Alyssa's just talked about, and I can handle those in a healthy way, which I can feel everything strongly. I can, confront my melancholy. I can, deal with my desire to be special or unique and an individual. Or I can like totally lose my, what, and not handle those things well and be on the low side of 4. But so that's when we were talking about interconnectedness. Yeah. That's why it's so interesting in the class. We got to talk to our numbers that we went to at one point. We got paired off, and to hear somebody else talk about living full time in a reality that I only experience in times of stress was like so interesting, because it just gave me so much compassion for that person. And I think, Alyssa, one time you said that Enneagram is a tool of compassion. And I love that, because that's truly like at the end of this, if you don't feel compassion for the other numbers you experience because you can relate to them better, then man.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it helped me develop, I've always had empathy for other people, but I would say I had empathy without understanding.
Oh, maybe you said that. I'm sorry. Did you say Enneagram is a tool of empathy?
It sounds like I could have said either.
Fair.
But yeah, but it really I had always been empathetic towards other people of like, I get you're going through something. I'm really sorry to hear that. But I had never really understood other people. And this helps you step into that understanding. And one of the things that I love about like a 1 going to a 4 in stress, one of the things that 4s are really good at is seeing the beauty in the world. And so for a 1, if you go to the high side of 4 in stress, for a 1 who you're constantly seeing the flaws in the world and how the world can be made better. When you go to a 4 in stress and you go to the high side of 4, you start to see beauty, and you start to see that things don't have to be perfect. Mm-hmm. You go to the low side,
everything's gonna end. I know, it's very dramatic.
Yeah. So 5s on the Enneagram, they are known as the observers. They are the most withdrawn of all the numbers on the Enneagram. Their core motivation is to be capable. I don't know if that's the right word. To be
ready?
I don't know. They are trying to collect as much knowledge as they possibly can. They very much want to be independent and self-reliant. And so it's very important to a 5 to be knowledgeable, to be capable, some of the pitfalls of fives is that they are so busy taking in knowledge and taking in information and processing information that sometimes they forget to act on it, or they confuse knowledge with wisdom. And just because you know a lot and just because you've collected a lot of information doesn't mean you're doing anything useful with it.
So in my experience, and you're connected to a five, but I have a couple good, both of them are males, so good guy friends that are fives. And I have found with them, and they've done some really good like work on their fiveness, that they don't desire to collect that information to make a decision or necessarily to have a solution. Like it's just because they're really good at playing devil's advocate. Like they can see both sides, but that's because they have a ton of information. So they can kind of cover the gamut. And then at the end of the day, well, maybe there is no right decision, which to me as a one is like maddening sometimes, because I'm like, there's always a solution. There's always an answer. But for them,
they do not care about persuading you. They are a great person to talk to. So if you are looking to buy a car and you are trying to decide which car to buy, you should have a friend that's a five, because what they're going to do is they're going to do all the research, and they're not going to present to you based on persuading you one way or another. They're going to say, here is all of the information that you could possibly need to make the decision. And then they want you to make the decision. They don't want to be making decisions for you. They want to present you with all the information and be knowledgeable, and then you be independent and you make the choice.
Yep. Sounds about right. Do you experience that in your fiveness?
Oh, my fiveness is very different. So as an 8, when I go to 5 and stress, my natural state as an 8 is that I am very opinionated. And so there's not very many circumstances where I'm going to say, you do what's best for you. Like, I'm going to tell you, hey, here's what I think you should do based on all of the information that I've gathered. And then if you don't do that, that's fine with me. I don't care. Like, you do whatever you want to do. If I think something's right and you don't, you go your separate way. As long as I know I'm heard and that I was able to tell you, here's what I think the right thing is, whether or not you do it doesn't matter to me. It's a little different for ones. Yeah. And that's another thing that 1s and 8s are different, because I'm in the aggressive stance. So I'm like very independent, and I push, like I kind of come at people, I hit against them, and then I back off. As a dependent person, if you know you're right and I'm wrong, and you know deep down that you're doing things the right way and I'm just not getting it right, it's very important to you to bring me over to do things the right way, because you are dependent, you are relationship oriented, you care so deeply about me that you can't stand the thought of me living in the wrong. And it's not about like, ha, I'm right, you're wrong. It's like, no, I know that this is the right way, and I want you to be in this with me. And for me, I'm like, I'm right, you're wrong. And you're like, well, no, I'm right and you're wrong. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. I don't feel any need to reconcile that. Like, the conflict can stay there. It's fine with me.
Yeah. Interesting. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like I went off on a tangent there.
No, it's explored a couple tangents so far. So
yeah. So the 6 is known as the loyalist or the guardian. Their core motivation, like I said when I was talking about my sister, is to feel safe and secure. There are 2 different types of 6s. There's the phobic 6 and the counterphobic 6, and it's all about their relation to authority. So 6s are very fear-driven. They are the people who are constantly, they're great planners. They're always looking for what is the worst that could possibly happen. They are always planning for the worst, and they expect the worst to happen. And so it's really fun going on vacation with a 6, because they think of everything that could possibly go wrong. They have a plan for, so you don't have to worry about anything. They worry about it for you. But so the phobic versus counterphobic is relation to authority. A phobic 6 inherently trusts authority and thinks that authority is trying to do what's best for them, and they should adhere to that. They should adhere to those rules, and that's what's going to keep them safe, is that trust and authority. Counterphobic 6s oftentimes resemble eights more, except that their core motivation is to feel safe. My core motivation is to not be controlled. But a counterphobic six has a complete distrust of authority and institutions. And they find safety in rebelling against those because they think you don't know what's best for me. You don't know what's best for the people. And so it's up to me to keep myself safe.
How much, just real quickly, how much of this is like created by environment, like things that happen to us as children versus like just it's built in, it's part of our genetic code, like nature versus nurture? Or is it
I wish I knew the answer to that. All I could say is I have to believe that it's a combination of both. And I don't know what percentage of each there is, but I do think like there are, I mean, even with a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, you can see personality traits emerging. And I just feel like there might be some default settings in there that are triggered with certain events that make me live more into my personality. I'll say that Suzanne, when she teaches the class, says that when we're born, we are born without a personality. And then it's become the day that we're born and the day that our mom and dad hold us for the first time is when our personality begins to get imprinted on us based on the way they treat us. I don't know if that's true. I'm not sure. There's no way of knowing.
Yeah, it's certainly funny because it's just, I mean, and maybe this is like a more existential question than just Enneagram because I've seen babies that are seemingly rebellious at ages that you would think they haven't developed the idea of rebellion yet, but and Augustine actually makes a theological claim for original sin, which other discussion, but based on watching a child like punch another child for stealing its mother's breast for milk. And so like it's really interesting just to think about, and it hit me in listening to sixes because I didn't know that it was in relation to authority. I don't remember that part of the class. Yeah. And certainly it makes you think like, well, like that was my first question. What's happened to them that they don't trust authority? Because I don't know if that's in a one's nature, but I generally trust authority unless I see something otherwise. So it's like
that is very much in a one's nature.
Yeah.
Because ones care about process, and because of that, they care about rules, and they assume that if there are rules and laws put into place, there was a process to establish those, and it's for good reason. And if there is a law or a rule, you're laughing because I'm because if there is a law or a rule that you disagree with, you'll still follow it, but what you'll do is you'll start going through a process to change it.
Yeah.
And you'll work through how can we reform this so that it makes more sense. For me as an 8, I'm just like, well, I'm just not going to do that. I don't care. Like, I don't care what's against the law. I'm doing what I want.
Yeah.
And for you, you're like, no, let's go in. Let's change this law. We can do this together. And I'm just like, blow it up. I don't care.
So great. This is so funny. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I cut you off at 6. Sorry.
Yeah. So, for 6s, I love 6s so much. First of all, Christine is a 6 and she's one of my best friends and my roommate. I know, love that girl. My sister's a 6 who is my lifelong best friend. And so I have a very special relationship with 6s. I think that they're misunderstood. 6s ask so many questions, and sometimes people get annoyed with them because they have so many questions, because people feel like you're challenging me. And that's not what they're doing. They're trying to fully understand the situation so that they can plan for the worst. And it has nothing to do with you and them thinking that you're not capable. It has everything to do with them needing to have a full grasp on the situation and fully understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that a big pitfall for the 6 is that when you expect the worst, you see the worst. And I think that you can see that in people. So like if you start dating someone and you're looking for, okay, something bad's going to happen. It's going to happen. I know it's going to happen eventually. What's the bad thing? He's got to have something wrong with him, whatever. You'll find it if you're looking for it. And then that becomes a focal point. But sevens. Sevens are known as the entertainers or the optimists. They're also known as the enthusiasts. I like that one too. The enthusiasts. Their core motivation is to be happy. They are some of the most fun, energetic people, lighthearted. They'll keep you laughing all the time. They're really quick on their feet. But since their motivation is to be happy, they don't experience negative feelings very well. And they try really hard to avoid them. And so a seven is going to find ways to distract themselves, to make themselves happy. And sometimes they have trouble with the serious moments. And it's not that they can't do it. It just doesn't come naturally to them. And they have to work really hard at it. And so if there's a moment that a seven is feeling sad, we need to let them feel sad, because I think that it's not necessarily a pitfall of a seven. It's the pitfall of what we do to sevens. So sevens are so fun and lighthearted and energetic, and they make us feel so good and make us feel so happy. We want that from them all the time. And so if a seven starts to experience that negative emotion, we're like, what's up with you today? What's wrong with you? Why are you acting weird? Like, be happy, because we don't like that. We want them to be their upbeat, crazy selves all the time, but we're doing them a disservice by not allowing them to experience those negative feelings. And it just reinforces that core motivation of they're going to find ways to cover that up so that nobody sees it.
Yep. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And based on the sevens that I know in my life, and it's funny because I'm connected to seven, but sevens are an anomaly to me, because it's like joy and jokes and fun and adventure all the time, and it's very rare for the sevens I know to see them sad. But it's good advice to let them feel sadness, to just let them be real.
And creating space for it and encouraging it. If a seven comes to you and says, I'm feeling sad, then sit with them and be like, okay, let's get sad. Like, what? Tell me why you're sad. Like, let's feel it together and sit in it with them. Which we don't always like doing. But advice to sevens, if you want to experience a sad feeling, you get yourself a 4 friend. Because the 4s are the best at sitting in those feelings. Like, if you're really going through something and you just need a shoulder to cry on, and you're not looking for someone to fix it, and you're not looking for someone to try and cheer you up, go to a 4, because they can do that. They can sit in that space with you, and they're really good at it.
Which is also interesting for 4s, that when they're in that place, they just want to be sat with and given company, and because I've experienced that with 4s too.
Yeah.
Man, we're so connected. Okay. 8s. I've been waiting for this because you're an 8.
I'm an 8. Yeah. So
many incredible women I know that are 8s. And so tell us what it's like.
8 women are a special breed. Let me tell you. So 8s are known as the challengers. They're also known as the boss. Our core motivation is to avoid being controlled. So what's really interesting about 8s is that we are strong, assertive personalities, and we are bold, and we speak in imperatives. And man, if I share an opinion, it often does not come across as opinion. It comes across as fact. Because that's just the way that I share information. It's not that I think it's a fact. It's just that that's the way that I talk. It's my style of speaking. And as a result of that, people think I'm trying to control them. I'm trying to control the way that they function in this world. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. I don't care at all about controlling other people. What I care about is making sure you're not controlling me. And it can come across as like I'm trying to, control others. But so pitfalls of an 8. One of the things that, I guess I'll just speak personally, because for other 8s, especially 8 men and 8 women are very different. And that's one of the only Enneagram number that in the class they actually differentiate between 8 women and 8 men, because 8 women tend to not be accepted by society. It's just not seen as feminine in the traditional stereotypical sense. But I think that one of my biggest pitfalls is I want to be indestructible. I want to feel strong at all times, and I don't want anyone to see my not my flaws. I don't want anyone to see my weaknesses or my vulnerabilities. And so I am not an emotional person. I am, to the point that it's a struggle for me to feel my feelings at times, because it feels like weakness to me if I'm having a negative feeling, or I'm feeling sad, or it's sometimes hard for me to talk about those things because I want to be a pillar of strength for others. So with the Enneagram here, you can see that we've already been talking about a little bit all of the connectivity of the numbers. And so there are 2 lines coming out from your number. One is the number that you go to in stress, and one is the number that you go to in security. So it doesn't mean that, Mara, as a 1, when you go to 4 in stress, you become a 4. You're not that. You are a 1 acting like a 4. So I think that that's a subtle thing. So as an 8 in stress, I am an 8 acting like a 5. And what that means is I retreat from the world. I'm no longer kind of like coming at people like a bull in a china shop. I am taking time to research, to reflect, to quiet time alone, to separate myself from other people so that I can come back stronger. But sometimes when I go to that place of stress, I retreat even more from my emotions, and I detach myself from my emotions. And that's the biggest struggle for me, is to sit in those feelings and to actually feel them. I can talk about feelings all day long, but to sit and feel them is really hard for me.
Which is interesting, because in security, you go to a 2.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is a number that is very in touch with, like, feelings. And so that's interesting. When
an 8 goes to a 2, it's a time of growth or a time of comfort and security. And in those times, I become, I'm willing to be vulnerable. I'm willing to share what I'm really feeling. So like one of the hardest things for me to admit is when someone has hurt my feelings. Because that feels like weakness to me. Like, why am I so weak that it all comes back to control. Why am I so weak that I allowed something that someone else said to affect me in this way? Then I'm like, they have control over me because what they said impacted me. And so it's really difficult for me to admit, like, hey, what you said really hurt my feelings. And 8s are in the anger triad. So what I do is, if I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling like something has hurt me, I take that and I convert it into anger because I'm very comfortable with anger. And so if someone hurts my feelings, then immediately I'm like, I'm pissed off. I'm annoyed. They said this. How dare they? And I become indignant.
Yeah.
But the truth is, I'm using that anger to cover up the hurt and the pain that I'm feeling that is too vulnerable for me to admit to somebody.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's where it's not easy work. It's really hard work. And learning those truths about yourself and seeing those tendencies in yourself, it's like a slap in the face every single time. And there are days that I'm just like, man, I can't believe I did that. Like, even knowing that I'm an 8 and even knowing all of the character flaws that I have and the strengths that I have in that, some days you get caught up in your personality. And so what I want to emphasize is that your personality is not who you are. Your personality is the mask that you wear to deal with the world around you. Your personality is your coping mechanism. Being an 8 is the way that I cope with the world, but it's not the essence of who I am.
Mm.
And that's just something that we need to remember, because I think sometimes we have the tendency to be like, well, I'm an 8, so deal with it, you know?
Yeah.
And that's not fair. You can't use it as an excuse. You use it as a way to better understand yourself and to be able to step outside of that and to stop hiding behind the mask of your personality.
Yeah. But know it and embrace it and kind of understand how it's working. Because I know sometimes it's a very, it's a very kind of Gnostic thought in a way, but I feel like sometimes we can be so detached from how it's functioning that it's like a separate part of us, as opposed to actually our identity and who we are. Yeah.
It's funny that you say that, because my therapist calls it your anchored self versus your floating self.
Yeah.
So your floating self is your personality.
Huh.
That's the way that you're out there presenting yourself to the world. And there are positive things that come in that, like with your, being a 1, there are so many strengths that come with that. And you can do so much good in the world harnessing the strengths of your personality. But if you start living into your personality in a default, you are not anchored. You're floating out in the world and you're letting your personality drive you and drive your decisions. You're no longer making your own decisions.
Yeah.
And so seeing those tendencies, seeing that, the most ironic thing of being an 8 is I don't want to be controlled, but if I let my personality take over, I am being controlled.
Yeah, by your personality. Huh.
Right.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, so you've given us a lot to think about, and we haven't
too much to think about.
Well, the funny thing is we've just skimmed the surface, right? We haven't talked about wings, which is when the numbers can go to either side. They can act in the number to the right or left of them.
Yep.
We haven't talked about stances. We haven't talked about triads. I mean, there's so much more. Mm-hmm. So just to close us out real quick, if somebody's listened to this whole thing, good job. And
way to go, guys. You hung in there.
Yeah, good job. And is definitely resonated with a couple numbers that Alyssa went over. Alyssa, what would you recommend their next step is? Like, what can they look at? Do you have resources of do you follow an Enneagram account that you like? Do you have a book that you recommend?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
So I think if you want to start this journey, I think and obviously there's not going to be a class offered for a while. I think a really great place to start is the book called The Road Back to You. It is by Ian Morgan Cron and Suzanne Stabile. They co-authored it. And it is an overview of the Enneagram, but in a deeper level. So at the very beginning of the book, it has a setup for you. It explains what the Enneagram is. It goes through stances and triads and all of this lingo that you have no idea what it means. And then chapter by chapter, it explains each number. And it says, this is a high functioning healthy version of the number. This is an average version of the number. This is a low functioning version of the number. Because within our number, there are times that we're very healthy and we're the best version of ourselves. And there are times that we are so destructive because we're living in an unhealthy way. Yeah. And it lays all that out. It talks about how you act in stress, how you act in security. They bring in stories to illustrate the points. And when you're reading your number, you're like, man, I relate so deeply to that. I didn't know other people experienced things this way. So that's a book that I recommend. I also recommend the Typology podcast, and that is by Ian Morgan Cron. I really like him. He's a 4 on the Enneagram, and he's really fun to listen to. He's a smart guy. He is really good at seeing, like, 4s are good at seeing the beauty. So he interviews different Enneagram numbers, and he can see such strength and beauty in every number and pulls that out of people. And it's awesome. I love it. Suzanne also has a podcast called The Enneagram Journey, where she goes through and interviews different numbers. And she also goes into talking about stances more deeply, talking about orientation to time, which is something we haven't even hit on. But I am convinced that in relationships, if you understand someone's orientation to time, that is the most important thing in being in relationship with another person, of understanding, are they past, present, or future oriented? It will, it'll close so many gaps in the way that you communicate and relate to each other. So she has a really, really great podcast on orientation to time. Another book that I think would be good to explore after you've figured out your number and you feel like you have a good handle on the other numbers and like what they mean, is The Path Between Us. And The Path Between Us is did I loan that one to you, Mara?
Yes, I still have it.
So Mara has a copy of it. And so in the book, it's a follow-up to The Road Back to You. And Suzanne writes The Path Between Us. And it's all about relationships. And so she goes into each number and says, 1s, this is how you can build stronger relationship with 2s, with 3s, with 4s. There it is. And it's so valuable because it's not just about romantic relationships. It's about your friendships. It's about your colleagues. It's about anyone that you come in contact with. How can I be better for you? And that's one of the biggest things so I learned a lot about myself for the Enneagram, but I think that one of the most valuable things is that I've learned how to love others better. And I've learned how to love people the way they need to be loved, not the way that makes sense to me. And I think that there was so much missing in my relationships, with my friendships, my romantic relationships, my family, because I was loving people the way I want to be loved, because that made sense to me. And so if someone's hurting, my first reaction is to give them space. Because that's what I want. Like, if I'm having a really bad day and I want space, like, let me reflect on what's going on. I don't want to talk about it. But now I'm learning there are people that want to talk about it. Like, and to know that one of my best friends, Lexi, is a 2. And if she texts me and is like, I'm feeling really sad right now, I need to pick up the phone and call her in that moment.
Yeah.
If I texted her and said, I'm feeling really sad right now, it means leave me alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just understanding what other people need and how they need to be loved is so helpful, not just interpersonally, but in the community of Christ.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. So
cool.
Enneagram.
Obviously,
I get really fired up and passionate about it. I'm talking with my hands up here. I know I'm yelling. I can hear it.
That just shows how much you love this program.
I do.
Curriculum. Thank you for giving us that. That was totally off script, and I love it because it was better than what I had in mind. And I think I'll go in and give some markers for people to take notes as well in the video. But I think this is really, really essential to reflect on, especially in this time where some of us are working from home, but there's more time to twiddle our thumbs and to kind of think about ourselves and what we're going through. And especially, I think, when we transfer back into the real world, understanding how we all interact with each other, and then understanding our own places of stress and security, we're gonna need that. That's gonna be a really important point of self-knowledge for some trauma that we may have experienced in this time. So it's really timely. So thank you for joining. Thank you for letting me interview you
Thanks
this
for
morning.
having me.
Of course. And if anybody is interested in talking to Alyssa more, you can definitely find her on Facebook. I'll tag her in this video. Send her a message, reach out. I mean, you can tell she's very knowledgeable, and her roommate Christine is as well. And so,
oh my gosh, when you reached out, you were like, as our resident expert of the Enneagram, I was like, if you really want to know Enneagram, you talk to Christine Canistraci. Like, she's got it.
yeah. I mean, that's basically who taught us, because she was one of our
She's taught the class 5 times now.
Yeah. And that's so great. I didn't realize she taught it that many times. Anyway, they're both, and they live together. So you get 2 for 1 if you just message them.
2 for 1. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much, Oaklawn. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in. And Alyssa, we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.